Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, more leaks for the upcoming NBA schedule. It appears we know the Bucks where they will start this season. We know that. Some thoughts on the Olympics and one more trade proposal out there on the internet. We share our thoughts on a trade that would potentially bring some youth to the Bucks, but at what cost? We discuss all of that coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis, and we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube as well, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's Locked On Bucks brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. A lot to get into here in the offseason, Camille, as we have slowly started to learn more and more about the NBA schedule coming up here. We mentioned this on last week's show. I think it's Thursday that we're going to find the schedule, but it's going to be either today, tomorrow, or Thursday. I do not see the league putting this out there on a Friday as a news dump. So it's going to be any day now that you would assume we get the schedule, just going off of where it has traditionally been released in the past and the fact that now we're starting to get some more of those leaks from Shams Charania and others. Last week, it was finding out what the Christmas Day games are. And as we touched on with you, me, and Frank, no Bucks on Christmas Day. I don't know if you caught it, but Bill Simmons' podcast over the weekend, he had Doc Rivers on again to talk about the Olympic gold medal game. And they addressed the schedule. Doc Rivers, almost to a T, said everything that we did about the Bucks not being on Christmas Day, that his response was, at first, we were kind of surprised to see it, but then as I told the guys, you got to earn it. And we were a first-round exit 2 years in a row. So it seems you, me, Frank, and Doc Rivers are aligned in our wavelength. You are thinking of the Bucks being excluded from Christmas Day.
That's good for the Locked On Bucks brand, I can tell you that. But no, I mean, definitely surprised when you first see it, like, wow, we're really not playing on Christmas. We've gotten used to it. I remember the first Christmas game that Giannis got. Eric Name sent out a tweet like, hey, Bucks fans, get ready. This is like going to be the first of many Christmas Day games for the Milwaukee Bucks. And it was. But with how the last 2 years have gone with the new star power emerging, like, for example, the Timberwolves are like Christmas, where it's like, okay, like that's different. But it's one of those things. I saw Giannis's tweet where he's just kind of like laughing, like, no Christmas Day for us, like, for real. And honestly, it's just one of more of those things that you can say it's a chip on your shoulder to add to it, because you're walking into a season with a Bucks team where it's like there's expectations for them, because we know if they flame out again first round, it's going to be something different the following year, but also a team that is theoretically being overlooked by a lot of other people as well. So it's really interesting to be a team with a lot of pressure, but also being underlooked at the same time. But Christmas, you got to earn that. And the Bucks the last 2 seasons haven't. I thought that maybe Dame and Giannis' star power alone would be enough, but nope, not this year.
I mean, a smooth segue here to get into the other leak that we know is I thought the Bucks should be playing on Christmas Day against the team that we've learned they're going to open the season with. We'll get to that in just a second, but not to toot our own horns. Listen to the show from Thursday when it was the three of us together last week, and listen to Doc Rivers' comments side by side. I mean, every single talking point, Camille, we nailed it. Where Doc even pointed to, I mean, you got Giannis and Damian Lillard on the same team, and you're not going to feature that on Christmas Day. But then I understood, okay, we lost in the first round. We got to earn that. It's a very deep, talented league, too. And, you mentioned that tweet and the frame of mind a lot of Bucks fans had that first year on Christmas Day in Madison Square Garden against the Knicks. You thought, okay, this is the stretch of quite a few of these to come. San Antonio Spurs are thinking the same thing right now with Victor Wembanyama. We both said, hey, this is the first time the Timberwolves have been on Christmas Day, and came to find out it's the third or fourth. So there's just so much talent. The Oklahoma City Thunder, too, another one of those teams, not there. There's just a lot of talent in the league, and that's what makes those marquee events even more difficult to be a part of. Not to prolong it anymore, though, I said I thought the Bucks would be playing Christmas Day against the team we have since learned they will open the season against. So we found out Monday afternoon from Shams Charania, for the third consecutive year, the Bucks are opening the season against the Philadelphia 76ers, and for the second time in 3 years, it's on the road in Philadelphia.
A tradition at this point. As soon as I saw Frank call it out on Twitter, I was like, yep, it's tradition at this point. 3 straight years against the same team. But honestly, this is a matchup where I'm excited about. I think off air, me and you discussed, like, I wonder if the Bucks might be an opponent for the Celtics on ring night. And then to find out that it's actually the Knicks, where it's like, I was like, okay, I can see that. Like, I'm actually into that matchup as well. But then you get Bucks 76ers, which is a matchup we've been wanting to see in the playoffs for years, but it has not seemed to find its way into fruition for one reason or another with the Bucks and the 76ers. And on top of that, we have the new look 76ers that we get a first look at opening night. So we get to see the Paul George, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey 76ers up against this version of the Bucks where, again, first offseason with Doc, has the whole coaching staff in effect. So I'm really excited about it. I know it's the third year in a row, but I'm actually excited for the matchup. Or it could be that I'm just really thirsty for NBA basketball. So anything's exciting at this point.
I'm excited for it too, but you almost wish you get those matchups that don't really matter. Like years back, I remember when the Bucks opened the season in Charlotte against the Hornets. Like those types of matchups, because we're going to overinflate the importance and meaning of game one of the regular season. I mean, look no further than last year when these two teams played. 76ers started to build on something, and you could see from night one, oh boy, Tyrese Maxey has already started to take the leap here. The Bucks, it just never really came together for the team. So, I mean, it's nice to be featured, and I would assume that's a Wednesday too. We didn't point out it's I think the 22nd, 23rd, whatever the Wednesday is of opening week is when the Bucks are going to be playing. Remember last year it was on a Thursday on a TNT game. I would imagine this is going to be an ESPN broadcast of the Bucks and the Sixers. So it's nice to get those national games and that recognition, but knowing how much importance we're going to put on 1 out of 82 games here, that's the only caveat of, I'd be perfectly fine if this was, the Bucks and the Trailblazers to open the season.
No, I feel you on that. And that's a nice little tease there as well, Justin. But for later on in the show. But I will ask you this question, and maybe we can talk about it at the top of the next segment. We know now who the Bucks are opening the season up against on the road against Philly. Do you have any teams that you will hope would be the home opener for the Bucks, where you're like, this is the matchup that I want to see for the Bucks to open up play in Milwaukee?
Yeah, it's a very good question. We will get into that. The tease you mentioned as well. I said at the top of the show, there was a trade proposal. Now, this isn't a rumored trade, so we should clarify that.
Yes.
It was just a proposal to look at, hey, what trades are out there that could help all parties involved? And one of those from Bleacher Report involved the Bucks. So we'll take a look at that as well. Coming up next on Locked On Bucks. Passion, drive, and patience. That's the formula for winning championships. And that is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right. So, Camille, you put out there, who would you look for the home opener for the Bucks, since we know this is going to take place in Philadelphia, that first Wednesday of the schedule. When you mentioned as well, ring night, is it possible the Bucks are going to Boston to take on the Celtics? I mean, I think the only other fitting choice would be the Portland Trailblazers that get to go to Boston on ring night and get to see Drew Holiday get his championship ring there. But for the Bucks, I kind of lean towards the same thing I just said about the overall opener, and I'd be perfectly fine if this was a lower tier team that the Bucks are going to be playing. I don't know if that's going to be the case. Remember last year, the way they started the season too, you had that home opener against the 76ers. You had 3 straight games at home to open up the season. You also had the Heat and then the Atlanta Hawks, who we thought were going to be much better than they were a season ago. So it was a pretty tough start on paper for the Bucks a year ago. It got much easier basically immediately after that, as we spent a lot of time last year talking about that schedule and how easy it was in the first half. If we stick with that, and if we're saying, okay, marquee type of matchup is the home opener for the Bucks, the Boston Celtics, I think, would be the number one choice of, all right, let's just get this out of the way. Let's see how these two teams match up. And hopefully you have full health for both of these teams, especially the Bucks. I think the New York Knicks are certainly a very interesting choice there as well. But I mean, how could we overlook 2 Central Division teams? Make a lot of sense too, because we kind of hinted at this last year and the Bucks just hung on by a technicality. It is not a foregone conclusion that the Bucks are going to win the Central this season. Yeah. So the Cleveland Cavaliers, who kept most of their team together and just made a coaching change, and also that rivalry that has started to heat up with the Indiana Pacers, those are the 4 that make the most sense to me. Either of those 2 Central Division teams, the Boston Celtics or the New York Knicks, if you're really looking for that spicy marquee matchup to kick off the home slate.
Yeah, my first thought was like, it's going to be the Pacers, isn't it? Like, I would just resign myself to being like, it's going to be the Pacers, isn't it?
But if you're the Pacers too, well, wait a minute. We won the season series and we beat them in the playoffs. We should open the season with them at home.
Well, shoot. Yeah, that's also arguable as well. Because I can't see them doing back-to-backs that early or anything like that. So Pacers could definitely be one. I don't foresee them doing like a Western Conference team in that week of just like off the top, because for as exciting as it would be to have like the Spurs coming to town for the home opener, so you get like that Wemby Giannis matchup early on. I don't know how feasible that is. So like I'm thinking it's probably going to be the Pacers or one of the other teams that you mentioned. I could definitely see it being Boston or New York or Cleveland as well. So I can't wait to see the full schedule.
You've made me revise my answer, Camille. So I'm going to completely reverse course. If I had my choice, I would take the Timberwolves or the Denver Nuggets, because it's one of 2 games against a team in the other conference. And I just mentioned how we can make too much out of those early season games. You don't make quite as much against the opposing conference. So yeah, let's burn one of those early in the season. So if I had my choice, I would love to see Giannis versus Jokic in the home opener, game number 2, we assume, maybe even game 3 of the regular season, or that other border battle between the Bucks and the Timberwolves.
Yeah, that would be really fun. I mean, that Timberwolves matchup is one I thought years ago when they had like the Zach LaVine, Andrew Wiggins, Cat Core. I'm like, man, I can see us in some finals matchups, but the Timberwolves, everything works well, and Giannis hits and Jabari hits and Chris keeps growing. It didn't work out that way.
Eric Bledsoe, an all-time great point guard.
Right. Didn't work
Tony
out that
Snell
way.
locking down defensively.
Yeah, nope, didn't pan out. But it would be fun to see Ant-Man coming to town to open up the season for the Bucks, especially like a matchup against a team where it's older, like a Phoenix Suns matchup. If we're talking just Western Conference teams, like let's get some of these matchups done early in the season so we can make.
And with that, your home opener is Bud returns to Milwaukee.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mentioned that trade proposal that was out there. We'll get to that in just a second. But before we move on to that, Team USA wins the gold medal over the weekend, a thrilling weekend. And we've seen and heard a lot of the comparisons of just how talented that team was. I mean, on paper, it may be just as talented or more than the Dream Team. We've talked about our ages, and Frank and I basically the same age or around there, just a little older than you, Camille. But the dream team, just for the age I was coming up with basketball, and I think I was 10 years old during that Olympics, there will never be another team like that for me, for anybody my age or older than that, I would assume as well. But watching this team, you got the sense, especially once we got into the knockout rounds, of man, this is really special. And Steph Curry's moment, for that to be Steph Curry's first Olympics and for him to do what he did against France. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to the call from the French announcers who were basically
perfect.
Perfect.
That devil
How
Curry.
is this possible?
It was perfect.
That last shot, though, that last shot is forever going to be iconic.
It is. And I saw actually someone put a thread together of just Steph Curry doing that to everyone else's teams. And I was just like, okay, like, first of all, this is exactly why the Olympics are so fun. One, it looks as what people would expect the All-Star game to look like, with all of these top tier athletes going full speed, playing as hard as they can. But on top of that as well, you get a chance to cheer for a lot of these guys who you're normally rooting against. No matter who, if you're not a fan of the Bucks, which listen to Locked On Bucks right now, I'm assuming you're a Bucks fan. There's been many games where LeBron James has come into town, broken hearts, where Steph Curry has hit that shot, and you're just like,
Kobe
dude,
back in the Bradley Center days.
Oh, LeBron had me hot in the Bradley Center day. Like, I'll never forget. I was like, let him shoot. Go ahead. That's not in his bag. Let him shoot those threes. And he's knocking them down. Then he's doing whatever he wants. So, like, it's fun to be on the other side of that, where it's like I get a chance to cheer for you and not say, like, please stop doing this to my team. So I love the Olympics for that in itself, being able to cheer for KD, for LeBron, for Steph, and just see how they're able to compete on that level when the lights get bright. Because that Serbia game, it was gut check time heading into that fourth quarter down double digits to see them pull that off. And Steph Curry, like you mentioned, somebody who before the last two games, people were kind of raising some eyebrows about his play. The shot wasn't falling consistently. So to see him pop off in a big way like that at the biggest time for Team USA was super fun.
Yeah, I remember some of the early LeBron games when he was really starting to come into his own. I think there was a big Earl Boykins game in one of those games, but it's something not quite as much the last few years, but for a while, if you were a Bucks fan, you experienced quite a bit of that. You were going to the Bradley Center to see the opposing team star, and more often than not, that ended with your heart being broken by that opposing team's star. The last thing to point out about the Olympics is it was kind of an interesting mix when you think about the guys like KD and Steph and LeBron, who were very heavy-handed in carrying the U.S. to that gold medal. But if we go a step beyond that, you always kind of see one player take, I don't know if the leap is the right way to put it, but put more together after the Olympics to see, oh, these are the sacrifices that are necessary. This is how you got to close these games out and win. If you had to choose one of those players from this team, who would you select? Because again, the difficult part is obviously LeBron doesn't need to get there. KD doesn't need to get there. Steph doesn't need to get there. And Jason Tatum, the storyline there of his lack of playing time. Drew Holiday is not on that level. It's not meant as a sign of disrespect. Same with Derek White. To me, it came down to really two guys. Not Anthony Edwards, who we thought was just going to, the way the playoffs went and everything else, man, this guy's going to be the starting two guard. He wasn't. Devin Booker, who was kind of the ultimate glue guy for that team. And Steve Kerr really heaped praise upon him afterwards. But Devin Booker had a very good run through the Olympics. And the other one, look, you wouldn't have suggested this early in the Olympic run, but watching everything come together for that team, and he hit arguably the biggest shot in the semifinals, or one of, I should say, Joel Embiid. Those are the two guys that would seem to be the most obvious candidates for, okay, let's see if you can build on this and take that next step this upcoming season. And I think for Bucks fans, the hope would be, well, that better be Devin Booker, because if it's Joel Embiid with everything Philly did in the offseason, that may not be good for us.
It might not be, but we always we hear a lot of guys.
Do you agree with those two suggestions?
I get the logic behind them. I actually feel like Tyrese Halliburton is somebody who learned a lot from this Olympics, although he
Okay.
didn't see the court a lot. And I think when you're in that situation of, I was the man, throughout the year here, I get to the Olympics, and now I got to kind of ride the bench because Steve Kerr is going with a
And was
10-man rotation.
perfectly fine with it too.
Yeah, I was too. I was like, hey, do what you got to do, Kerr. Rotations are perfect. No, but just being able to be around those different legends and seeing their work habits, seeing what it takes, so on and so forth. Normally, you leave the Olympics and you're kind of like, I'm taking some of this with me that I learned from what these guys are doing. I remember hearing that from the Redeem team when they were like watching Kobe. Like, I went back and started doing X, Y, and Z because I saw Kobe was doing this, and my game improved thereafter. So I do think there's a bump for Halliburton, although he didn't get on the court. But for Embiid, I think being over there playing an international ball in a situation where he was the villain every time he got announced, touched the ball, anything with him was going to be instant boos from that crowd. And he's somebody who we already know he likes to troll. He enjoys all of that stuff. So seeing him respond,
Already back at it too.
yeah. And he responded from that pressure as well. So
Yeah.
like it could be really good for them, but to me, Embiid still looks like he's not all the way healthy. Like something about the way he was moving still seemed like he has to, kind of work on that. But if he comes back healthy and he's good to go, he's going to be a really dominant force, especially with Paul George being there next to him and Tyrese Maxey.
Yeah, it looked very ugly early in the Olympic run there, but it started to get a little better. So we'll see if there's any carryover coming into this season in terms of not how does Joel Embiid grow as a individual player, just what he learned from winning at that level is the big piece. Okay, we mentioned a couple of times now this trade that has made its way through social media, a proposed 3-team trade that involves the Bucks. We'll break it down and share our thoughts on that coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. And thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Camille, it was Monday morning that this trade started to surface. So it came from Bleacher Report, and it started to pick up traction from a few basketball fans and Bucks fans on Twitter. Hoops Wire, the account on Twitter, reposted it as well. So here's the gist of it. Greg Schwartz of Bleacher Report is the one that made this proposal. The idea was, okay, let's look at other trades that could be out there. And what do we think would benefit all parties involved here? So if you're listening to it, we apologize if listing off all the names. If you're viewing the show here on YouTube, you're going to see the graphic outlining what this trade is. But the 3-team deal would involve the Bucks, the Golden State Warriors, and the Portland Trail Blazers. And in this trade, the Milwaukee Bucks would send out the very polarizing Chris Middleton, bring back Jeremy Grant. So Jeremy Grant comes to the Bucks from the Blazers. Chris Middleton goes from the Bucks to the Warriors, and the Blazers get Andrew Wiggins to absorb some of that money, and then also Moses Moody to give them some more youth. So that is the trade. Again, this isn't a rumored trade. I think we cannot stress that enough. It is simply a proposed trade. But Camille, when you heard about this deal, your immediate reaction was what?
Not my boy Chris. That's always my first reaction. Not on Chris's birthday. No, my first thought was just kind of like, okay, Jeremy Grant for Chris Middleton. In my mind, Jeremy Grant always projects as a small 4. Like he's about the same height as Chris Middleton with a little bit more weight on him. So I was like, okay, I'm not sure how much I like him at the 3 as much as I do the 4, which is the position that Giannis plays. But in addition to that, like, I think right now in this moment, Chris Middleton is still a better player than Jeremy Grant. It's just that Chris Middleton has the health concerns around him, right? But the same token, if you look at games played by Jeremy Grant, he hasn't played at least 70 games since the 2019-2020 season. So That's not concern enough, like where it's like, oh yeah, you get a healthier, younger guy. Like the numbers don't quite back that up. And given how small the Bucks window is right now, given all the different question marks that we have with the contract lengths and everything like that, I feel like Chris Middleton makes sense for this window a bit more than Jeremy Grant does. But if you're looking to a next window and you believe that much in Jeremy Grant, I would get it.
So this does check out through the cap, at least for the Bucks. I haven't circled back to double check on the Blazers. It would work for the Warriors. They would basically almost be dollar for dollar. The Bucks would actually be shedding about $2 million because Chris is at just over $31 million on his contract this season, $31.6 million. Jeremy Grant for this season is making $29.7 million. He is under contract next season as well through the 26-27 season, and then has a player option in the 27-28 season. That's when it starts to shoot up to the mid-30s. 27-28 is also the year that Giannis has his player option, and the year before that, Damian Lillard has a player option. So it would basically kick the can down the road for the Bucks and line up your three biggest contracts all within a year of each other there. I don't hate it as somebody, you and I, two of the biggest Chris Middleton supporters out there. My immediate reaction seeing this deal, I didn't totally hate it. It was one that I immediately looked at and said, no, you can't do that. I still don't know that I've come around to, okay, you should do that. And this trade makes a lot of sense for one of the reasons that you pointed out as well. And that's position for Jeremy Grant and where's he going to play. Look, you can play him at the 3. I'm with you that I think of Jeremy Grant as more of a smaller 4, a stretch 4 that you would use. His shooting numbers have gotten better year after year. He's put up pretty good back of the basketball card numbers the last couple of seasons after he left Denver with that nice playoff run that they had in the bubble to go to the Pistons. His scoring immediately went up. It's consistently been around 21 points per game since he left the Nuggets. He's been in the most improved conversation. We pointed to the 3-point shooting. It's been over 40% each of the last 2 seasons and was about a 36% 3-point shooter those 2 years in Detroit. So there are some things that make sense to me. Look, you would get younger. You would get a guy that is certainly versatile defensively and would help you on that front. What I struggle with is Jeremy Grant and Giannis really an optimized front court offensively? I know the numbers say he's become a better shooter. He's gotten better there. I still don't know that he's at the level of a shooter that I think ideally you probably need to pair next to Giannis if that's your 3-4 combination.
Yeah, it's a respect factor as well of like, okay, we see the last 2 seasons, Jeremy Grant, you've shot over 40% on about 5 threes per game and everything like that. But everybody knows the track record of a Chris Middleton and what that weight of him being on the court means. So there's that aspect of it as well. And plus on top of that too, when I think about like the playmaking aspect of Chris Middleton, I think that's really valuable for this Bucks team as well, because if you traded Chris Middleton for a Jeremy Grant, you are losing a big aspect of your playmaking on this particular team for a guy who I don't believe averages more than like 3 assists a game or anything like that. But again, I think that comes to, in my head, I'm like, I think he plays better as a small ball forward than he does as a small forward. While as Chris Middleton is more of that 3 for you. You could play him up as a small forward, but again, you don't lose that playmaking aspect from Chris Middleton, which I think is really important with this team, especially when you're doing the staggered lineups and trying to have one of your big 3 out there at all times. Just Chris Middleton brings a lot to the table outside of the scoring alone on offense.
Yeah, 1.6 is the career assist numbers. I don't have the assist rate in front of me. It did get better, and that was one of the big pieces when he went to Detroit. Was okay, we're going to use him a lot more as a primary scorer and as a playmaker for this team. So those numbers did go up slightly there once he went to Detroit, and some carryover there in Portland as well. But to your point, it's not at the level that Chris Middleton would bring to you. Look, regardless of what certain segment of Bucks fans think, he is a very good playmaker. And we saw times last year he was essentially your backup point guard in running the second unit offensively. The other two things to point out here, I mentioned it would bring you youth. And the asterisk there is that Jeremy Grant is younger than Chris Middleton. But I think a lot of us, as you and I were talking about this before we start to record, forget Jeremy Grant's been in the league since the 2014-15 season. So this is going to be year number 11 for him. So there's already starting to build up some years there. He has not been in the playoffs since that run with the Denver Nuggets either. So we're already going on 4 straight postseasons that he has not been a part of. So that's where it starts to get even more difficult of saying, okay, the guy that he was, granted, he had a nice run with the Nuggets his last time in the playoffs. It was a much different role than what he's been doing in Portland and in Detroit. It's theoretically a different role than what you would ask of him here in Milwaukee. So you don't really have that comp to line up and say, okay, after his game has taken a leap, we've seen X, Y, and Z translate into the playoffs. And that's one of the big things that we pointed to every year now. When you make these personnel moves, how does this make us better or help us compete with a team like the Celtics and those teams at the top? But also, is this a guy that is a 16 player and not an 82 player? And look, we saw it one year with Jeremy Grant. I don't know that that's enough of a sample size to confidently say, yes, all of this translates to the playoffs, and he can do that in the postseason. The last thing I would point out as well, and get your take on this, Camille, is look, the knock on Chris Middleton is going to be games played. So if you make this move and say, well, we're getting younger and we're getting more durability. Well, as we just pointed out, Jeremy Grant is suddenly approaching 30 years old and been in the league for quite a while. I get Chris Middleton's older than that, but it's not quite the big trade-off that you think it would be. And the other part is this. Look, if your knock on Chris Middleton is that he doesn't play in enough games, he's injury prone, he's not reliable. Granted, part of this could be the teams that he was playing for, there was no incentive to play him. And let's just have Jeremy Grant come down with flu-like symptoms and he doesn't play and we lose this game. But since he left the Denver Nuggets in those 4 seasons that followed, his games played have been 54, 47, 63, and 54. So you're not really selling this as we're bringing in durability here to replace Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree with that point. And in addition to that, just think of the contract length, which we talked about a bit for a second here, but we know that Chris has his contract for this season, and then next year he has a player option where you're looking at Jeremy Grant, and he has a player option in the 2027-28 season. So let's say theoretically things don't go right for the Bucks this season. Hope not, knock on wood, it doesn't. But if it does, the Bucks have a clear where you can look at the contracts on the team. You can be like, okay, hey, we have 1 year left with Chris with a player option, but we can figure out what happens if he opts in, if he opts out, so on and so forth. But make this trade doesn't work out with Jeremy Grant, like he's on your books for a couple more years thereafter. It's just a different situation for the Bucks to be in. And I think, again, with this window right now, I think Chris makes a lot more sense for the team. But also, I do like if it doesn't work out, you see that end goal line in sight where you can really make some moves and change things up. Not to say that any contract is untradeable, but we have seen with this new CBA how it makes making those trades a bit more difficult to do.
And that Chris player option is over $34 million, about $2 million more than Jeremy Grant is on the books for that season. But as we mentioned, Grant is then on the books for $34 million the season after that, and a player option of $36 million the season after that. Look, and at that point, he's going to be in his mid-30s. He's going to pick up that player option unless Jeremy Grant just finds the fountain of youth and has this resurgent season or seasons with the Bucks. So you're locked into it. And to your point, you have more of an escape plan, not to make it sound too dire, but if things go south, you have ways you can get out of it and pull the ripcord. And look, the other part of it is you have a productive season from Chris Middleton. You can extend him for less money. You wouldn't do it during the season because that's when you'd have to give him the 120% raise or some of the other parameters. But you could theoretically, with Chris Middleton, and even as much as people may not want to hear it as well, with Brook Lopez, you could theoretically work out short-term extensions for less money and save money in that sense. So an interesting trade that was floated out there. I think we're both aligned from the sounds of it. I don't hate it,
Right.
but if you press me on it, I still probably wouldn't do it.
Same here.
Leave your comments as well. Your thoughts. Would you make that trade? What is the way to sell Jeremy Grant in that proposed move that was out there? So leave your thoughts in the comments. Camille and I will view those and address some of those on our next show, or reply in the comments as well. I mentioned we anticipate the schedule coming out any day now. So once that does, we will get into all the particulars of the schedule and our reactions. We have to get into the over-unders for the Bucks as well. We can share some details on the draft that we talked about. We're going to do a win totals draft based on over-unders. So it's going to be me, Camille, and Frank will each draft 10 teams, and it's going to be an interesting way to calculate who wins this. We'll explain that once we do the show, but that is coming your way relatively soon. And again, whenever the schedule drops, we'll have a show with our reaction to that. That will do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.